What's up, guys? I got a request to talk about my favorite smartphones for $150. These phones I have tested myself, most of them. So let's go ahead and get started. So if you are on a extreme budget and you only have $150, these are some of the best phones that you can pick up right now. So the LG G7 is your overall number one and best bet. Not only is it around $150 right now on Amazon, but if you want to get it on eBay, I've seen it for super cheap, like 130, 100 bucks even. So this is still a very good phone. I have a ton of videos on the channel about this phone as well. So you have an aluminum frame, glass back on here. It's a really nice feeling phone. Actually, one of my favorite feeling phones in the hand of all time. You do have IP68 dust and water resistant as well. So you have a 6.1 inch IPS display. It's HDR10. It's an absolutely beautiful display. You do have a notch on here, but it's 1440p with a 564 for the PPI. Absolutely beautiful display on here color wise, though it's not super bright compared to some of the AMOLED and OLED displays, but I really love this display. It is a really nice display. So you do have Android 10 on here with the Snapdragon 845, Adreno 630. Surprisingly, most people wouldn't expect this phone to be a great gaming phone, but it actually can play pretty much any game right now. So Call of Duty, Fortnite, PUBG. I have a full gaming test. It actually does play these games on high settings, and it's pretty good. So you also have micro SD support, 64 gigs of internal storage and 4 gigs of RAM. You have a really loud sounding stereo speaker on here, or sorry, just a single firing speaker, but it's a boombox speaker, and it is really loud, especially when you just put it down like on a table or whatever. It gets super loud as well. You also have a 3.5mm jack with the quad DAC. NFC is on board, and you also have a really good camera setup, a dual camera setup, 16 megapixel standard and a 16 megapixel ultra wide. You also have 4K video, 30 or 60 FPS, along with an 8 megapixel selfie camera that shoots in 1080p. Overall, the cameras are fine. I do recommend that you put a Gcam port on this phone as well, but the standard camera is fine. The images are these days a little soft. Dynamic range is mostly dynamic range, but everything else is really good on this camera. So you do have a 3000 milliamp battery with 18 watt fast charging and wireless charging. Overall battery life is fine. You can get a day's battery life out of this phone around 6 hours and 30 minutes. It's my screen on time, which is fine for the size. So the G7 is probably your best bet here. Another phone that is extremely good is the Redmi 9, again around $150, probably cheaper on eBay as well. This phone is really great, not as spec heavy as the G7, but still a really great phone. You have a plastic design, not super fancy, but I like the design, and the phone actually has a nice weight to it. It doesn't feel cheap at all. You have a pretty big display. It's an IPS display at 6.5 inches, 1080p, 395 for the PPI. You have the little water drop notch on here. The display was fine when I was using this phone. I had no problems at all. You also have Android 10 out of the box with MIUI 11. MIUI 11 is highly customizable. It's a pretty heavy skin. A lot of stuff that you can play around and do with that skin. You also have the Helio G80 and Mali G52. So overall, this is like a medium to low tier gaming chip. So you can definitely game on this phone, no problem. Casual gaming, PUBG, Call of Duty, I played on this phone fine. Of course, you won't be able to max stuff out, but it does play it fine. So you do have micro SD support with 32 gigs of internal storage and 3 gigs of RAM on here. You also have a 3.5mm jack on here, a pretty decently loud sounding speaker, as well as NFC, and this phone actually has an infrared port, so if you want to control your TV or whatever, you can do that, which is always cool. I always love that addition. You also have a physical fingerprint scanner on the back, which works very fast. I had no issues with that. This phone surprisingly has some really good cameras as well. You have a 13 megapixel standard, 8 megapixel ultra wide, 5 megapixel macro, and a 2 megapixel depth. Shoots in 1080p. As you can see from the photos, I was super surprised. Very good dynamic range, pretty good detail. The ultra wide did a really good job too. The macro camera wasn't bad at all. I was really impressed with the cameras on this phone for this price point. You also have an 8 megapixel selfie that took some really good photos. Pretty good color accuracy as well. So I really like the cameras on here. I was really surprised with it. You do have a 5020 milliamp battery and 18 watt fast charging. this phone is going to be a beast. This is like the standout feature with this phone. So battery life can definitely get you 2 days of battery life easily. It is a real battery champ for sure. Another great option is the Moto G7 Play. This phone is easily around $100 right now, like 120. It is super cheap right now, and I really enjoyed this phone. I had no issues with this phone, but it's got plastic design on here. It's actually splash resistant, so in the rain you can kind of get it wet, it won't break immediately. It's also a 5.7 inch IPS display, so it is very compact as well. It is a 720p display, 294 for the PPI. Display was fine. You do have quite a big notch on this phone, but overall the display, I had no issues with it for the price that you're paying. It is upgradable to Android 10, and the phone is actually pretty speedy with the Snapdragon 632 processor and Adreno 506. I was really surprised they put that chipset in there because the phone pretty much just flies in terms of performance. You can do casual gaming on here, Call of Duty, PUBG. I played on this phone no problem. So I was really surprised with performance, and it pretty much has a near stock version of Android on here as well, which makes it just really snappy. So you do have micro SD support, 32 gigs of internal storage and 2 gigs of RAM on here as well. And you also have a headphone jack, a pretty decently loud speaker. This phone unfortunately does not have NFC, so if you rely on mobile payments, you won't have that with this phone. But you do have a physical fingerprint scanner on the back, which works very fast. Now the cameras on here are, if you're in good lighting, the cameras are okay. You get a decent shot, but pictures overall are just kind of soft on this phone. So you have a 13 megapixel main sensor, and that's pretty much it. No ultra wide. You actually have 4K video. The 8 megapixel selfie camera. The cameras are okay. Again, if you're in good lighting and sunny outside, you get a decent shot, but overall, you know, pictures are a little bit soft on this phone. But you do get a 3000 milliamp battery with 10-watt charging on here, and battery life is surprisingly really good. I definitely was able to get through the full day, no problems on this phone, and actually still have battery life left. So this is actually a pretty good phone for battery life. Next is the Samsung Galaxy A20. Now the price will vary depending on if it's locked or unlocked. So if it's unlocked, it'll be around $150. But if it's locked, this phone is easily like $80, $100, so it's super cheap if you get it locked. They're mostly on like Metro and TracFone prepaid carriers and stuff like that. But this phone has a plastic design, and overall I really like this phone. The design still looks pretty good to me. You have a Super AMOLED display, which that was one of the things that made this phone special when it first came out, is that Super AMOLED display. You have beautiful colors on here. It just looks really good. It's a 6.4 inch display, water drop notch, 720p plus display, 268 for the PPI. Overall, it was a pretty good panel, fairly bright, and again, beautiful colors, deep blacks on this display. This phone does have the latest Android 10 update, which was awesome, so I was really happy to see that. And it's got the Exynos 7884 and Mali G71. Overall, performance on here is fine. You could definitely do some casual gaming. It's not a gaming phone. I wouldn't recommend it for that, but you do have micro SD support, 32 gigs of storage and 3 gigs of RAM. And again, One UI is quite a bit of heavy skin for this phone, but overall, if you maintenance the phone right, then it'll be fine performance wise. You do have a 3.5mm jack on here, as well as NFC, so you do have that for your mobile payments. A pretty decently loud speaker on here, as well as a physical fingerprint scanner on the back. Now this phone has actually very good cameras for when it came out. So you have a 13 megapixel standard, 5 megapixel ultra wide. It actually takes some pretty good dynamic range photos. Actually has a pretty good amount of detail, as well as an 8 megapixel selfie, which is pretty good. So is it gonna be like the best, blow you away? But it is pretty good for its price point. So overall, I was happy with the cameras. You have a 4000 milliamp battery with 15-watt fast charging as well. So this is definitely a phone that can last you all day easily. You can easily get around 7 to 8 hours of screen on time with this phone, no problem. Now last on the list is the LG V30. The only reason I don't talk about this phone a lot is because it did not get the Android 10 update. It stopped at Android 9, but at this price point, I think most people just want to do basic things on their phone, and if their phone does do additional things really well, then I think that's a plus. Now, the V30 basically still has a lot of flagship qualities. It's got a premium design, a classic metal design. It's IP68 dust and water resistant. It's got a probably the best display on this list, actually, a POLED HDR10 display at 6 inches, 1440p, 537 for the PPI. A beautiful high quality display still with no notch, very good colors, deep blacks, super sharp display as well. I overall love the display on here. And again, you have the Snapdragon 835 and Adreno 540, so this phone is still very capable of gaming and stuff like that. So I was able to play games at high settings, no problem. Call of Duty, Fortnite, whatever. I was able to play on this phone, surprisingly. So the Snapdragon processor is still very good. You do have the micro SD support along with 64 gigs of internal storage and 4 gigs of RAM. This phone also has a 3.5mm jack with the quad DAC, as well as NFC on board with a physical fingerprint scanner on the back. The cameras are still pretty good. You can see from the photos right here. I didn't have any issues. It's gonna take photos, just as good as newer budget phones, if not better, honestly. So you have a 16 megapixel standard, 13 megapixel ultra wide, 4K video with a 5 megapixel selfie. As you can see, you get some really nice natural colors, really good detail. The ultra wide is really nice on this phone as well. Overall, I was really happy with image quality on the V30 still in 2021. So you do have the 3300 milliamp battery with wireless charging as well. And the battery life is fine on this phone. I was able to get through a day pretty easily with this phone, so you would get around like 7 hours of screen on time, which is fine for this device. So what do you guys think? Be sure to let me know, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.